I reached the motel after dark, feet aching from the last miles of the long trail. The building sat alone at the end of a narrow gravel driveway that curved off the road and vanished between thick trees. Pines crowded close on three sides, their trunks straight and tight like a fence. The parking lot held only a few empty spaces and one older pickup with mud baked along the wheel wells. No lights beyond the office sign. The woods swallowed everything else. I chose the place because it was close, cheap, and open. My pack stayed in the car. I took only what I needed inside. The room smelled faintly of cleaner and damp carpet. The bedspread felt rough and thin. A small window faced the tree line, no more than 30 feet from the glass. I noticed how close the woods felt, how the shadows pressed against the curtains even before I closed them. I showered to wash off sweat and trail dust. The hot water rattled through old pipes. My legs trembled when I stood still. Hiking all day sharpens senses and then dulls them at once. Everything feels louder and quieter at the same time. I lay down early, lights off, window uncovered. I liked knowing what was outside. Sleep came in pieces. My body dropped, then snapped awake. The air conditioner kicked on and off with a hollow knock. Somewhere a branch scraped bark against bark. At some point I checked my watch. It read a little after 2 in the morning. My mouth felt dry. My pulse beat fast for no reason I could name. That was when I noticed movement outside. At first it registered as a change in shape, not motion. A darker line among darker trunks. Something tall stood between 2 pines near the edge of the clearing. It did not sway or step. It simply occupied space that had been empty before. I lay still, head turned toward the window, eyes adjusting. I told myself it was a trick of fatigue. Then it shifted. The movement was slow and controlled. It bent forward, not at the waist like a person, but along its length, folding slightly, then straightening again. It took a step that placed weight carefully, as if the ground mattered. Leaves did not scatter. No sound reached the glass. The shape rose higher than any person I knew, thin through the shoulders and torso, limbs too long in proportion. It was not bulky enough to be a deer. It did not carry antlers. It did not move with the loose grace of one. My first thought was a hiker cutting through the woods, someone trying to stay quiet near the motel. That idea lasted only a moment. The proportions stayed wrong. The head sat low, forward of where it should have been. The back arched in a way that made the whole figure seem stretched. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and kept watching through a narrow gap. My breathing stayed shallow. The figure took another step, then another, always bending slightly before each shift, placing its feet like it expected noise. It moved parallel to the tree line, never entering the open space, never turning toward the building. It paused often, long enough that my eyes began to question whether it had moved at all. The sense of being seen came later, not from any change outside, but from the way my skin tightened. I stayed flat, careful not to rustle fabric. The room felt too small. The window seemed thinner than it had earlier, the glass only a suggestion of separation. Minutes passed without measure. The figure stopped again in a spot where the pines grew closer together. Its outline broke into pieces among the trunks. For a while nothing happened. Then it bent lower than before, almost crouching, and stepped deeper into shadow. The darkness took it in sections until there was nothing left but trees. I did not move. My muscles burned from holding still. The blanket trapped heat and the smell of detergent. My heart thudded against my ribs. I waited for sound that never came. No footfall, no brush, no breath. The woods returned to their earlier quiet, a quiet that now felt staged, as if something had arranged it. I checked my watch again after what felt like an hour. Less than 10 minutes had passed. I stayed awake until dawn. Each time my eyes drifted closed, I saw the shape standing upright, unmoving, waiting. Morning light came slowly, thin and gray through the trees. When the sky brightened enough to see clearly, I stood and looked outside. The clearing showed nothing out of place. No tracks in the gravel. No broken branches. The pines stood as they had before. I dressed quickly and stepped out with careful steps. Near the tree line, a patch of leaves lay pressed flat, as if something heavy had stood there for a long time. The leaves were damp and crushed into the soil, their edges dark. The shape was long and narrow. No clear footprints showed, only a smooth compression, the ground packed hard. It sat exactly where I remembered the figure pausing longest. I drove away with the sun low and pale, the road empty. I told myself explanations as miles passed. Exhaustion distorts perception. Light and shadow play tricks at night. Wildlife moves in ways that surprise people who do not see it often. These thoughts held until weeks later, when I read a short local notice while planning another hike. The area around that stretch of road had reported a starving black bear with severe mange. Hair loss had made it look thin and elongated. It had learned to move quietly near buildings at night, drawn by dumpsters and food smells. It often stood upright to sniff, its back arched, its head low. Tracks were hard to find because it favored leaf litter over open ground. The description matched too closely to ignore. The height, the thinness, the silence, the way it avoided open space. The flattened leaves where it had likely paused to scent the air. Nothing supernatural, nothing beyond an animal pushed by hunger into unfamiliar patterns. Understanding did not bring comfort. It brought clarity. I had watched a wild animal adapt itself to human edges, close enough to a window that a thin sheet of glass was the only barrier. I had seen how quietly something large could move when it needed to. I finished the long trail the following year. I planned my stops with care. I chose places with distance from woods, with clear lines of sight, with daylight arrival. I never returned to that motel. Knowing what stood there did not make the memory lighter. It made it heavier, grounded in the fact that some things do not need to be unknown to be frightening. I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching endlessly ahead. My eyes dry from staring at the road and my back sore from sitting in the same position for too long. I hadn't planned on stopping, but fatigue had started to press in, making the edges of my vision blur. My GPS showed a small motel a few exits off the highway, one of those places that exist for a single purpose: a bed and a roof for the night. I booked a room online before I even exited, more out of habit than expectation. By the time I reached the gravel driveway, the sun had fully set, leaving only the weak glow of a flickering neon sign that read the motel's name. The building was small, single-story, wooden, and weathered. The paint was peeling at the corners, the siding warped in places, and the gravel lot had uneven patches where grass had grown through. Only a few cars were parked in front, each coated with a thin layer of dust and dirt. The entrance led directly into a small office, more a hallway than a lobby, with a desk pushed against the wall and a single chair that had seen better days. Behind the desk, the receptionist sat slumped, eyes barely open under the weak fluorescent light. He barely acknowledged me, handing over the key to room 3 after a brief glance at my identification. The corridor leading to the room was narrow and dimly lit. The carpet was threadbare, fraying at the edges, and a dull, musty smell clung to it. The walls were pale, streaked with years of cigarette smoke and water stains that had turned the wallpaper brown in irregular patches. I moved slowly, the soles of my boots making a soft thud against the floor. At the end of the hall, my room door stood slightly warped, its paint scratched and chipped. The key fit into the lock with a reluctant click, and the door opened to reveal a space that smelled immediately of damp carpet, faint mildew, and something metallic that I couldn't place. The room was small, with a single bed, a worn dresser, and a chair tucked into a corner. The mattress sagged slightly in the middle, the sheets faded and coarse to the touch. A small television sat atop the dresser, its screen dusty and cracked at one corner. The curtains were thin and yellowed, blocking little of the light that came from the single bulb above the bed. I set my bag down, pulled back the sheets, and ran my hand over the mattress, feeling the dip in the center where it had clearly been used for years. I opened the window to let in air, the night outside cool and carrying the faint smell of pine mixed with the exhaust from passing cars. I stripped out of my hiking clothes and climbed into bed. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater, which rattled intermittently, and the occasional creak of the wooden frame as the building settled. Sleep came slowly, The exhaustion of the drive was balanced by the unfamiliar environment, the smell, the shadows, and the uneven mattress. Every small noise seemed amplified, each creak and groan making me tense and glance toward the door or the window. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to a faint smell, a sour, metallic tang that seemed to seep from the bathroom vent. At first, I assumed it was sewage or a clogged drain, the kind of thing that happens in older motels. But the odor didn't stay near the vent. It moved, subtle but distinct, drifting into the room, heavier near the door and lighter near the bed. I sat up, heart beating faster than it should have, eyes scanning the corners. The carpet near the door looked ordinary, the floorboards intact, the walls unbroken. Yet the smell persisted, pressing against me. I reached for my phone, intending to call the front desk or even 911, but the line was dead. The signal was non-existent, and the room seemed sealed in a way that amplified the isolation. I thought about leaving, running out to the lot and getting in my car, but the night outside was dark, unfamiliar, and I didn't want to risk slipping on the gravel or stepping into the road. I stayed on the bed, trying to breathe evenly, convincing myself that the smell had a mundane source. A clogged vent, plumbing issues, old cleaning chemicals, but every rational explanation felt incomplete. Minutes stretched into hours. I lay on my side, blankets pulled tight around my shoulders, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the occasional groan of the building settling. Shadows moved across the walls as the single bulb flickered, elongating corners and creases in ways that made the room feel larger than it was. The smell remained, pressing against me intermittently, strongest near the door. I tried to imagine how ventilation worked in a building like this, how airflow from a small vent could carry odor in such a precise, unnerving way. I didn't sleep again. By 5 in the morning, the first light of dawn began filtering through the curtains. The street outside began to take shape, the gravel lot empty except for a few cars that had likely arrived overnight. I cautiously stood and opened the door, stepping onto the threadbare carpet of the hallway. The smell was less pronounced now in the cooler, cleaner air of the morning. I moved quickly toward the office, the receptionist still asleep, head resting against the desk. I left the key on the counter, making no effort to wake him, and exited the building. The morning air was crisp and smelled of wet gravel and pine. The sun illuminated the lot, revealing the peeling paint of the motel and the uneven patches of grass and weeds in the gravel. The building appeared harmless in daylight, ordinary even, but the memory of the room, the smell, and the oppressive quiet stayed with me. I started the car and drove off, keeping a vigilant eye on the edges of the lot, the shadows among the trees, and the empty spaces that had seemed alive in the dark. Reflecting on the night later, I understood that nothing extraordinary had occurred. There had been no intruder, no ghost, no supernatural presence. The room had smelled terrible because it was old, poorly ventilated, and inadequately cleaned. The sagging bed, flickering light, and broken television were the result of years of wear and neglect. The odor from the vent was probably a plumbing issue or an accumulation of dampness and dust that intensified in the confined, poorly ventilated space. Yet the combination of fatigue, isolation, darkness, and sensory irritation had made the room feel threatening in a way that was very real. That motel taught me the subtle ways a place can feel unsafe without any obvious threat. It showed me that perception is shaped by context, loneliness, exhaustion, unfamiliarity, and that ordinary problems like bad plumbing or old carpets can trigger a visceral response when you are vulnerable. I left the motel with a clear understanding that the fear I experienced was real, but the danger was not. It was a simple, tangible lesson in awareness, in listening to instinct without assuming the worst, and in respecting the subtle power of environment on the mind. Even now, years later, I think of that night whenever I find myself in a new, small motel. I check the vent, the door, the lighting, the bed. I walk through the room slowly, taking in the air, the smell, the shadows. The memory lingers not as a story of terror, but as a reminder that ordinary places, when combined with exhaustion and isolation, can create extraordinary tension. I never returned to that motel, but the experience reshaped the way I travel, the way I assess spaces, and the way I respect the small, often unnoticed details that make a place feel safe or unsafe. The motel itself remains mundane in memory. A small, wooden building with peeling paint, a narrow gravel lot, and a single light flickering above the office. It was nothing remarkable in daylight, but the night had revealed it differently. The room, the vent, the sagging bed, and the oppressive smell had created an experience that was entirely believable, entirely real, and entirely grounded in the ordinary. It was a lesson in how vulnerability and environment can combine to produce fear, and in that, it succeeded fully. I left knowing that I had survived without incident, that the motel was, objectively, just a building in need of repair and cleaning. Yet the memory stayed with me, vivid and precise, a demonstration of how small, ordinary elements, light, smell, isolation, exhaustion, can shape perception and create a lasting impression. I never needed more than that. A single night in a small motel, real, tangible, and unsettling in its simplicity, to understand the quiet power of environment over the mind. I was driving late at night for work, the highway stretching empty ahead, headlights cutting through the darkness. My body ached from hours behind the wheel, and the thought of trying to make it home was unbearable. I opened Google Maps and spotted a motel just off the exit, the kind that promised a bed for the night but nothing else. I turned off the highway and followed the narrow, dimly lit road until I saw it. A squat, rectangular building with a flickering sign and a parking lot cracked and overgrown with weeds. The windows glowed faintly, and the front door looked like it had been painted over decades ago. Inside, the receptionist was slumped in a chair behind the desk, asleep. The air was thick and heavy, carrying a smell that hit me immediately: mothballs, the sharp ammonia-like sting of urine, and the damp, musty odor of old carpet. The lobby was sparse. A single chair pulled up to the counter, a vending machine humming faintly in the corner. I didn't wait for the man to wake. I left my information on the counter and received a key without comment. The room number scrawled on a faded piece of paper. The hallways were narrow and dimly lit, the carpet threadbare and rough underfoot. The walls were lined with wallpaper peeling at the edges, curling like dry leaves. The room itself was worse than I expected. The bed sagged in the middle, the sheets thin and faded, carrying the scent of countless previous guests. The ceiling light flickered intermittently, casting the corners of the room into deep shadow. A small, outdated television sat on a dresser, stubbornly refusing to turn on no matter how many times I pressed the power button. I set my bag on the floor and tried to air out the space by opening the window, though the night air did little to counteract the smell. It was cold outside, the moon faint behind clouds, and the room felt heavy, oppressive. I showered quickly, the water lukewarm, and collapsed onto the sagging mattress. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the creaks of the building settling. Around 3:30 in the morning, I woke suddenly, the room filled with a sharp, putrid smell emanating from the bathroom vent. At first, I assumed it was sewage, a backup in the pipes, or the effect of the old plumbing struggling with the temperature change. But the smell was not static. It moved, creeping into the room, stronger near the door than in the corner where the vent was located. It carried a wet, organic quality, as if something had been left to rot. My heart began to race, the hair on my arms prickling. I reached for my phone, intending to call the front desk or perhaps emergency services, but the line was dead. I checked the outlets and connections, even the battery, but it was as if the room itself had swallowed the signal. I considered leaving immediately, but the thought of navigating the dark hallways and gravel lot outside seemed more dangerous than staying put. I sat upright on the bed, scanning the corners, watching the shadows bend and shift along the cracked wallpaper. The faint flicker of the light made them jump from one place to another, subtle movements amplified by the low visibility. Minutes turned into hours. The smell persisted, creeping closer to the door, growing heavier each time I thought I could ignore it. I stayed as still as possible, listening to the hum of the vent and the occasional settling creak of the building. The floorboards outside the door shifted slightly, a soft groan underweight, though no one was there. I measured the space in my mind, imagining each possible source. Pipes, rodents, the old ventilation system, but nothing fit completely. The sensation of presence, the creeping stench, and the silent shifting in the room was tangible. It was enough to keep me awake, alert, and tense, every sense focused on the smallest detail. By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the blinds, I was exhausted and jittery, muscles stiff from sitting upright on the sagging mattress. The room looked harmless in the morning sun, the cracks in the wallpaper clear, the floorboards just old and warped. I packed my bag quickly, careful not to disturb anything unnecessarily. I left the key on the counter and walked through the narrow hallways, the smell dissipating slightly in the cooler, cleaner air outside. The lot was empty except for a few cars, and the flickering sign above the building looked tired but harmless. I got into my car and started the engine, feeling relief more than fear, though the memory of the smell and the shifting shadows lingered. Reflecting on the night later, I understood that there was no supernatural element, no malevolent force. The motel itself was old, neglected, and poorly maintained. The bed sagged because of age and overuse, the vent carried odors because of outdated plumbing, and the flickering light and broken TV were simply failures of decades of wear. But the combination of fatigue, isolation, and a sensory environment that assaulted my instincts created a situation that felt unsafe and threatening. The reality of vulnerability in a place that looked ordinary by day became pronounced in the dark, in the smell, in the shadows, and in the unresponsive communication systems. I drive past motels like that cautiously now, evaluating each for upkeep, safety, and responsiveness before considering a stop. The experience stayed with me not because anything unexplainable occurred, but because it highlighted how quickly the ordinary can feel menacing when your body is exhausted, your mind alert to subtle anomalies, and the environment fails every expectation of safety and comfort. It was a simple, tangible reminder of the importance of situational awareness and the fragility of perceived security. I will never use that motel again. The memory of the creeping smell, the flickering light, the sagging bed, and the silent, unresponsive building is vivid enough that I still feel a shiver when recalling the vent and the way the odors seemed to move. I left at the first sign of daylight, not because I had seen anything, but because I understood that being in that space, awake and alone, was unnecessary and avoidable. The motel itself was harmless, but my perception, honed by fatigue and unease, made it dangerous enough to be unforgettable. That night taught me something about the nature of discomfort and awareness. It doesn't take a threat to feel threatened, just conditions that amplify uncertainty. And in that motel room, every detail, the smell, the shadows, the unresponsive phone, the flickering light, was a perfect storm of ordinary elements that combined to feel extraordinary. I never questioned the reality of what I experienced. I only understood that it was enough to make me leave the moment daylight made the world comprehensible again. We had been planning a weekend at a lake cabin near Tahoe for weeks, and when it was canceled at the last minute, the disappointment was immediate. My two friends and I scrambled for alternatives, trying to salvage the trip. The nearest options were limited, and after hours on the road, we found ourselves at a roadside motel, a small, wooden structure tucked between the trees, with peeling white paint and a gravel lot that looked like it hadn't been graded in years. It was the kind of place that promised shelter rather than comfort, and by the time we arrived, exhaustion had dulled any hesitations we might have had. Check-in was casual, almost too casual. The man at the desk didn't ask for ID, didn't seem concerned about our reservation. The building itself felt aged in a quiet, almost careless way. The wooden siding sagged slightly in spots, the paint bubbled under years of sun and rain, and the parking lot lights flickered weakly, leaving long shadows around the edges of the property. We were assigned rooms without fuss. My friends and I settled into one, tossing our bags onto the bed and stretching after the long drive. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old cigarette smoke, a combination that hung heavy in the room. I opened the window to get some fresh air, the cold night breeze carrying the scent of pine and damp earth from the surrounding forest. The night was quiet at first. Somewhere in the distance, a car drove past on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the room before disappearing. The ceiling fan creaked as it turned lazily above us, and my mind, still buzzing with the drive, began to slow. Around 1 in the morning, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to calm my racing thoughts. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching outside the window. At first, I assumed it was a coyote or a raccoon, common in that area, rustling against the brush. But then came a low growl, deep and resonant, vibrating through the thin wooden walls. I tensed. Coyotes don't growl like that. My first instinct was to convince myself it was just a dog, maybe a stray or one that had wandered off a nearby property. My friend muttered something about a wild dog outside, but there was a hesitation in the tone that betrayed unease. I sat up slowly, eyes fixed on the window, trying to make sense of the shadows beyond. The shape that moved just outside wasn't right. It was large, heavy, and low to the ground, crouched in a way that didn't match any animal I had ever seen. Its arms or limbs, I couldn't tell for sure, seemed long, moving with a deliberate slowness that suggested intelligence or at least awareness. It didn't run. It didn't jump. It simply shifted its weight and followed some invisible line along the edge of the building. I held my breath, heart thudding, every instinct screaming to retreat, to hide. I had never experienced that kind of presence before, something that seemed aware of me without exposing itself fully. The growl came again, closer this time, and I could hear the faint scrape of something heavy against the dirt. I turned to my friends, and we all instinctively drew closer together on the bed. The window had no curtain thick enough to hide the view completely, and the pale glow from the parking lot cast the figure in partial light. I could only make out the outline, but it was enough. The posture was wrong for any dog, coyote, or bear I knew. Low, arms bent, moving in a way that was almost upright but not quite human. The shape seemed to measure us as much as we measured it. I tried to stay calm, rationalizing everything. It was a bear, though I had seen bears before and this didn't match. A large dog, but none that I knew of carried that weight or moved with that kind of stealth. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the shadows, the angle of the moonlight, the combination of fatigue and imagination. But my gut refused to accept it. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. We didn't sleep again that night. Each time one of us dozed, the faint rustle or shift in the darkness would wake us instantly. The scratching persisted in sporadic bursts, followed by low, deliberate growls. Every now and then, I caught a glimpse of movement just outside the window, always slow, always measured, never fully revealing itself. We didn't leave the room, didn't check outside. The door was locked, but the sense of exposure didn't ease. The motel felt abandoned in a way, yet there was this constant reminder that something was there, just beyond the thin wooden walls. By sunrise, the first light filtered through the trees, illuminating the gravel lot and the small cabin-style rooms surrounding us. We moved cautiously toward the door, peering outside. The night had left the world calm, ordinary, almost too normal. The dirt below the window was pristine, except for paw prints, large and deep, far bigger than any dog we had seen in the area. They led to the edge of the forest, then disappeared. There was no evidence of disturbance, no damage to the window, no signs of forced entry, no trace that a human had been outside. Just those massive paw prints, impossible to explain. We left without breakfast, driving away quickly, glancing back at the motel only once. In the morning light, it looked harmless, even inviting in a strange, quiet way. The peeling paint, the wooden siding, the long shadows cast by the morning sun, all mundane and familiar. Yet the memory of the night stayed with me. The sensation of being watched, the deliberate movements outside the window, the low growl that vibrated through the room, they lingered. I have never been able to explain what we saw. Every logical explanation feels incomplete. A large dog, a bear, a stray? Nothing fits the movement, the posture, or the scale of those prints. And yet, I have never claimed it was supernatural. The simplest truth is unsettling enough. Something large, something deliberate, something aware of us, moved around the motel that night. It left no evidence beyond those prints, yet it made its presence known in a way that was impossible to ignore. Since then, I avoid motels in remote areas at night whenever possible. I check windows, look for signs of wildlife, and try to remain aware of the surroundings, but nothing erases the memory of that night. The motel near Tahoe remains in my mind. A quiet, wooden structure with peeling paint, ordinary in daylight but strangely alive in darkness. We were lucky. Whatever it was, it didn't approach further, didn't break in, didn't follow us beyond the trees. It stayed just outside the window, keeping its distance, leaving only the proof that it had been there, tangible in its own subtle, terrifying way. Even months later, I replay the night in my mind, reconstructing every sound, every shadow, every movement outside that window. I know that rational explanations exist, and yet none fully satisfy the memory. The unease wasn't caused by anything supernatural, just by something real, something large and deliberate that we couldn't see clearly. That is what made it terrifying, and that is why I will never forget that night at the roadside motel near Tahoe. I was driving back home after a long weekend with my family, exhausted and restless from the endless stretches of traffic. The detour off Route 9 had seemed like a small reprieve at first, a way to shave a few minutes off the drive. But by the time it narrowed into a thin, winding side road, the charm had worn off. Streetlights disappeared entirely, leaving only the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the night. My eyelids were heavy, and the familiar ache of tension from sitting too long pressed into my back. Somewhere past 11, I realized that trying to push all the way home wasn't going to work. I needed a break before I made myself a hazard on the road. That's when I saw the sign. Rest stop in. It blinked irregularly, letters sputtering in and out like the motel itself was fighting to stay visible. It was the kind of place I had passed countless times but never considered, the kind of roadside lodging that promises little but offers a roof. I turned into the gravel lot, tires crunching against loose stones, and parked near the front entrance. The lights were weak, a faint yellow leaking from the lobby's front window. I pushed the door open and stepped into the small space. The air smelled of mildew, mixed with the sharp, bitter scent of old coffee that had sat in the machine since who knows when. The carpeting in the lobby was frayed at the edges, and the furniture sagged as though it had given up years ago. Behind the desk, a man, or maybe just a shape, it was hard to tell at first, sat quietly. He didn't speak. He simply nodded when I approached and slid a key across the counter without a word. Room 7, it said. The hallway leading to the room was narrow, lined with walls where the wallpaper peeled at corners and edges. The carpet was threadbare, faded to an almost uniform gray, and the faint smell of damp followed me down the corridor. Each step echoed slightly, a soft thud that seemed louder in the otherwise still building. The room itself smelled similar, damp and stagnant, the faint metallic tang of dust in the air. I set my bag down on the bed, ran a hand over the sheets, and felt the coarseness of the fabric beneath my fingers. The first hour passed without incident. I showered, letting the hot water wash away the weariness of the road, and changed into clean clothes. The mirror was streaked, a thin layer of grime blurring my reflection, but I barely noticed. When I finally crawled into bed, the thin mattress sagging slightly under me, the room seemed normal enough. I drifted off, the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional car passing outside lulling me into a shallow sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke. At first, it was just a feeling, a vague sense of unease I tried to push aside. Then I heard it scraping, soft at first, deliberate, coming from the wall behind the headboard. My mind raced through explanations. Pipes, the building settling, maybe a branch tapping against the exterior wall. But the sound continued, methodical and insistent. It wasn't random. It was purposeful. I froze, listening. A second sound joined it, slow, heavy breathing. Not mine. Not anything I could have made. I stayed still, telling myself it had to be a vent or the air system cycling. After a few moments, I swung my legs off the bed, planting my feet on the floor, and stood up. The carpet was cool under my toes. I checked the bathroom first. Empty. The sink and toilet were normal, no sign of anything unusual. I opened the closet, shoved aside a few hangers. Nothing. I got down on my hands and knees, peering under the bed, but the shadows there held nothing. The breathing stopped as soon as I opened the door. The hallway outside was silent, the faint light from the lobby vending machine the only illumination. I scanned both directions. No one. The corridor was empty, still, except for the distant whir of the machine. I felt the hair at the back of my neck stand up and a chill run down my spine. I stepped back into the room, heart hammering, and that's when I noticed them. Footprints, wet, smeared, leading from the doorway straight to the bed. They were small, incongruous against the threadbare carpet, each one distinct, a damp imprint that left a faint smell of water, maybe sweat. My stomach dropped. I couldn't understand how they could be there. The door had been closed the entire time. I hadn't seen anyone, hadn't heard anyone enter, and yet the prints led directly to the bed where I had just been sleeping. Panic rose slowly, a tight knot tightening in my chest. I grabbed my bag, not bothering to pack anything, and opened the door. The hallway was still empty, quiet, the vending machine humming in the distance. My steps were quick, almost frantic, as I made my way back to the lobby. The receptionist, or the figure at the desk, was still there, sitting as quietly as before. I dropped the key onto the counter without looking up. No explanation, no words. I didn't stop to explain myself. Outside, the night air hit me and I felt slightly better, though my body was still trembling. I got in my car and locked the doors immediately, the gravel crunching sharply under my tires as I pulled away. The motel faded into darkness behind me, its sign flickering one last time before vanishing completely from view. I never stopped to consider whether anyone had been in the room with me. I didn't sleep properly for days after. The memory of those wet footprints, leading straight to where I had slept, stayed with me. The image of that silent, empty lobby and the still, expressionless figure behind the desk became a fixed part of my memory. Looking back, I realize now how easy it could have been. The location, the isolation, the lack of oversight in that old, neglected motel. All of it made an ordinary place dangerous without anyone doing anything overtly threatening. No supernatural forces, no monsters, just human reality. Empty hallways, weak locks, and the possibility that someone could have entered without me knowing. The motel itself wasn't alive. It wasn't even aware. It simply offered opportunity. I never returned to that stretch of Route 9. I avoided side roads late at night, and I never stayed in a roadside motel alone again. It was a simple lesson, learned the hard way, about fatigue, vulnerability, and how quickly the ordinary can turn unsettling when the conditions are right. The rest stop and exist somewhere in my memory as a quiet warning. Appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most unnerving encounters are the ones that make perfect sense when you step back and think about them logically. No ghosts, no specters, just the unnerving reality of being exposed and tired in a place where no one was watching. Even now, when I drive late at night past similar motels, I find myself scanning the doors, imagining what could be just beyond them, and I feel that same tight knot in my chest that first night at room 7. It was real, tangible, and completely avoidable, which somehow made it worse. I got lucky. That night, I left before discovering what or who had really made those prints. I know I'll never have that certainty. I'll never know if it was someone watching, waiting, or just the motel's decayed floor giving way to a strange pattern of moisture. All I know is that I left, and that was the only safe decision I could make.